Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another chapter of Experiencer Interviews. And today we've got another amazing soul coming to us from the US. We have Dr. Bruce Rapuano on board today. Dr. Bruce is a distinguished scientist whose career has spanned multiple disciplines from molecular biology to astrophysics. Bruce is not only a respected researcher and academic, but he's also an author with a truly unique story to tell. His latest book, Dominion Lost, a scientist's own alien abduction encounters, is a compelling and provocative account that challenges our understanding of reality and explores the intersection of science and the paranormal. This bombshell nonfiction book, recently discussed by the author with George Knapp on Coast to Coast AM, is the only first person account to date of a UFO alien abductions, authored by a mainstream American scientist. The author, who has multiple degrees in neuroscience, goes on the record regarding his incredible and fascinating experiences with UFO close encounters, including a very close encounter during which he was abducted from a group of 8 other witnesses, interactions with alien beings, and an unexplained nasal implant of specific structure, all of which were consciously recalled without regressive hypnosis. This is the story of a mainstream scientist's own interactions with the highly advanced alien beings who abducted him and at least thousands of other people. So, Bruce, thank you so much for coming on, sir.
It's a pleasure to meet you and be with you here today on your wonderful podcast.
Thank you. Well, considering your background, why did you decide to open up about your experiences? Because we know that the subject can be easily it can impact our careers and how other people view us.
I've been considering doing this for a long time, for decades. I started connecting the dots in terms of you know figuring out what my experiences meant, my early experiences, and I didn't really know what was the cause of them until I began in the 80s, mid 80s, late 80s, early 90s, reading these great UFO abduction books by pioneering investigators like Dr. John Mack, the Harvard psychiatrist, Bud Hopkins, of course, one of the groundbreaking investigators in this field, and David Jacobs. And I just was stunned at, in reading the accounts of hundreds and even thousands of people that claimed they were abducted by ETs or aliens, how closely their experiences, almost to the last detail, parallel my own. That's when I finally figured out the phenomenon of alien abduction was real, at least in America. I was reading about American investigations of American accounts of alien abduction. Not only that it was real, but it had happened to me. But I was, at that time, at the start of my career as a biomedical research scientist, I was working at the top cancer research center in America, Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center in New York. And I just gotten grant funding. And at that time, Whitley Strieber published his first book, Communion. So there was an explosion of interest in this new, I call it epiphenomenon in ufology, known as alien abduction. And I wondered, could I tell my own story by publishing a magazine article or a book? But I didn't think I would be able to sustain my career, because I couldn't imagine that my colleagues and the people reviewing my grant applications at the NIH would take too kindly to me publishing a book as a mainstream, scientist about alien abduction. So I kind of kept my story to myself, kept reading books about UFOs and the topic of contact with ETs for the next few decades until, fast forward to 2015, 2017, when, the story by Ralph Blumenthal and Leslie Kean and the New York Times came out with these incredible sightings by the U.S. Navy pilots of what were clearly non-human aircraft or spacecraft. And again, this started the current era of disclosure. And I felt this was appropriate time for me to come forward as the first a mainstream American scientist to go on the record by publishing a book describing his abduction experiences. And it was certainly a good time in terms of this impending disclosure from at least from the American government that we're all waiting for. But secondly, comes in a time in my career where I'm more established, and I feel that it's not going to have such a detrimental effect on my livelihood, career, and also on the careers of my colleagues. So this is why I felt now was such an appropriate time for me to come forward and publish this book.
You get into your scientific background, really, the specifics and, the fields you actually studied.
So the question is about my background.
Yeah, yeah. Everything that your degree and
It's just it's such a coincidence that you know one of the most compelling threads, narrative threads within the alien abduction story is this story of implants, and not only the implants that Dr. Roger Leir removed from countless abductees, which have been subjected to scientific investigation, and no one really has come up with a persuasive theory as to what the function of these implants might be. But that all the people that had these implants claim to be abductees, but there's also a very sizable percentage of people of abductees that have implants that report having implants in the region of the head, the ear, behind the ear, inside the ear canal, under the eye. But a great majority of those are nasal implants. I myself recall at an early age having a nasal implant, being, of course, abducted by these short 3.5 to 4 foot tall humanoid beings. And coincidentally, I have a background in neuroscience. I have a bachelor's degree in neurobiology from the University of Pennsylvania. I also have a PhD in neuropharmacology from the University of Connecticut. Neuropharmacology is a study of the effects of drugs on the brain. So I have this background in neuroscience that, of course, causes me to have a lot of questions and motivates me to do a lot of research and investigation into what the possible function of these implants, particularly the nasal implants, might be. And that's why I've devoted several chapters in my book to what these implants could be, what type of materials are used, whether they're standard materials that we have that human scientists work with, or metamaterials with certain physical properties that we really don't understand, how they work, what types of energies they use, and what their function is in the brain, because a lot of abductees insist that their implants, although they were introduced through the nasal cavity, were actually implanted into the brain. And I go on in my book and in one or two of the chapters to describe how I think not only are these implants used to monitor human brain activity, but also they're used to study the human brain, to understand it, to kind of decode it by analyzing electromagnetic signals from all our mental activities, and with the main purpose of perhaps trying to understand us for not only from the standpoint of scientific curiosity, but one theory is that the aliens are trying to learn about the human brain so that they're better able to control human thought, human behavior, because they want to be able to exert some type of influence or control over our species and our civilization. At least that's my theory.
Yeah. Regarding your background and all that, must have been a fascinating thing to be able to see your experiences through different points of views regarding your abductions compared to somebody who just got has a college degree. So it must have been a fascinating thing.
Yeah, yes, because all of these aspects of how the UFO technology works, how the propulsion system works, what type of materials the spacecraft is constructed from, and what the nature of what I call a biological program of experimentation is, involving human beings and also cattle, because there's some similarities in terms of the analysis of what the cattle mutilations are all about, and what um, uh, the experiments involved with the human abduction program are all about. But I'm interested because I have a kind of a diverse background in biology, neuroscience, cell biology, and even material science. I'm interested in a variety of questions that grow from the study of this phenomenon, and you know, particularly the biology. And I was fascinated from reading Lieutenant Colonel Philip Corso's book, The Day After Roswell. He was the intelligence officer that claimed that all of the debris from the crash at Roswell was funneled into his office. Who, he was the head of foreign technology I guess in the late 40s and 50s, and he not only did he claim to farm out all this debris to industry and different academic centers in the U.S. to reverse engineer technologies such as fiber optics, night vision goggles, integrated circuits. But he also had a lot of interesting stories to tell about he was able to examine the graves. In one occasion, he was able to find where one of the bodies of the graves had been stored, and he could examine it at length. And not only that, he was able to obtain the autopsy reports that were done by pathologists at Walter Reed Hospital in Washington on the grays that had died at the crash at Roswell, and reported on so many interesting findings where the pathologists claimed that the gray physiology is very similar to human physiology, but there were a number of clear differences. The brains look similar, but there were such dramatic differences in other organ systems. They had no digestive system. They had no excretory system, no kidneys, no bladder. In examining the skin, the pathologists had speculated that since there was no excretory system, no digestive system, that the grays obtained their nutrition through the skin somehow and excreted waste via the same route. So, as first and foremost, as a biologist, I was most interested in this type of biological analysis of the alien beings themselves compared to how their spacecrafts work. And I describe in detail how it would be very straightforward, given current human knowledge about molecular biology and recombinant DNA technology, genetic engineering, for human scientists to begin to genetically engineer the grays, which leads me to speculate that in fact the grays are nothing more than clones. They're clones that were genetically modified for a certain purpose, so they can serve a certain function as drones that are under the control of some master species, alien species that's using them to experiment on human beings, among other things. Again, that's one of the theories I explore in Dominion Lost, in terms of what the nature of the grays is.
Yeah, so let's talk about your book. So, A Dominion Lost, a scientist's own alien abduction encounters. When you got this book out, was it like a healing thing for you?
It did feel like I was unburdening myself. I feel like the field of ufology and alien abduction is so incredibly fascinating, and to realize that I have a story to tell that maybe is different than the story of any other abductee, and may be able to even contribute to the understanding of what the phenomenon is all about. Very, very exciting for me. I did feel that by writing the book, finally I was able to tell the world and tell my family, which I'd never told anything about this, my experiences to, that this had happened to me. And, you know, I guess I felt this was the right thing to do because, you know, if you have a story that you feel can help people, that can contribute to human knowledge, particularly scientific knowledge, it doesn't feel good to hold it back. So I think it's a relief that I was able to do what I feel was the right thing for me to do at the right time in at my life and career. But I can't say that my experiences were anywhere near as traumatic as a lot of abductees report, fortunately. So it's the gratification I feel in writing the book is based on the fact that I feel I'm in a unique position, and I'm grateful for this, that I can contribute somehow to the understanding of this phenomenon. And that's what I'm most grateful for.
And in chapter one, the moment the time stopped, you described your UFO close encounter where you get abducted from a group of 8 witnesses. What actually happened?
Well, it was in the summertime. I remember the exact day, June 1965. This was the year of what at the time was the worst um, blackout, electrical grid blackout in American and Canadian history, the Great Northeast Blackout, where 38 million people, I believe, lost power for more than 12 hours in the Northeast US and Canada. And but just 2 or 3 months before that, that was in November. It was again a couple days before the beginning of summer, just before dusk, and we're playing a game of kickball in our front yard, 4-on-4. Group of 8 children, 10, 11, 12 years old. And I was playing defense right near the street. And I was the first to see this gigantic, brilliant light out of the corner of my eye. It was maybe at the 10 o'clock position, but I couldn't really get a good glimpse of it because its view was partially obstructed by this large oak tree we had in our front lawn. So without telling anybody, I left the game and I walked toward our front door of our house where I can get a better view. And the only way I can describe what I saw was it looked like the classic biblical Star of Bethlehem. This star, but huge in size. What looked like a star, but really was at least 2.5 to 3 times the size of the full moon from point to point. And again, it was asymmetric. Some of the points were larger than others, but it was so brilliant that it was almost difficult to look at. So the rest of my classmates, and then when they seen I'd left the game, had joined me at this point. We were looking at this object with fascination for 30 to 60 seconds, and at that point the light went out as if by a flip of a switch, so fast it was almost unreal. And in its place was what I would describe as a fireball, a red fireball, probably about the size of a dime, held at arm's length. And whereas the Star of Bethlehem object that I had seen, that I called Star of Bethlehem, was motionless, silent. And now I could see this fireball was beginning to move in a southwesterly direction. Did not change its altitude, direction, or speed. And I watched it as it disappeared over the horizon. It took about, I would say, 90 seconds. And then I actually walked to a neighbor's yard to be able to see it travel away from us until I couldn't see it anymore. And then I came back to our group in our yard, in my yard, and we discussed what we had seen and kind of compared notes. And at this point, the strange thing was everybody was reporting different things. Someone had seen a group of 3 multicolored lights, 3 lights of different color in the vicinity of the object. I had never seen anything like that. Another person had reported some type of static electrical discharge, like lightning around the object, and I was the first to see it. I was the last to see it disappear over the horizon. I never saw anything like that. So the upshot is, along with that evidence, other evidence, I concluded that for a period of time I was not present at that sighting, that somehow I've been abducted from that group. And what clinched it for me is that during this discussion, one of my classmates, a girl, said to me, "Bruce, where did you go?" I said, "Well, you saw me walk to our next door neighbor's property, so I can get a better look at the object." She said, "No, I saw you there," but she had seen me at one point, and then at one point, I had disappeared from our property. So again, this was a sighting that I believe, based on my other experiences of alien abduction, of actually, seeing grays, a number of grays, at other times in my life, that this was another classic abduction event that was witnessed by at least one other person at the time, which is kind of rare in with respect to what's been reported for this phenomenon.
In chapter 2, you talk about the UFO wave of 1965. I'm not aware of that one. What happened?
Yes, it's really amazing to me when it was amazing to me in writing the book when I began to research what happened in 1965. But within, gosh, a month or two of the sighting I just described to you, there was a wave of sightings in the Midwest, um, Colorado, Montana, Kansas, Texas, Oklahoma, all within a period of a couple days in late July, early August. And interestingly enough, sightings of the same group of UFOs, 4 or 5 UFOs that were observed on radar, civilian radar, military radar. It really appeared the same group of UFOs was traveling from contiguous state to contiguous state. And in every case, they were sighted over military bases. One base was the early, one of the first NORAD bases before the current location in Cheyenne Mountain in Wyoming, I think. Bases where nuclear weapons, ICBMs, were stored at the time. All part of the group of strategic U.S. military bases. That was in late July, early August, and then I think a couple weeks after that, there was the very famous sighting at the Edwards Air Force Base, I think just outside the Mojave Desert in California. Edwards was one of the most important Air Force bases for the testing of experimental U.S. fighter aircraft. And at that time, I think it was in October, there was a sighting of 10 to 12 UFOs that came in very close over the runway, demonstrated fantastic aerodynamic performance capabilities. In fact, there were several fighter aircraft scrambled, vectored to where the UFOs were sighted over Edwards, and every time, and it was very similar to the sightings in 1952 over the U.S. Capitol. Every time the aircraft were vectored to the UFOs, they were able to ascend from 5,000 feet to 100,000 feet within several seconds. So they were almost like playing a game of cat and mouse with the UFOs. And, there were other sightings in Exeter, New Hampshire, in the same fall of 1965, reported by John J. Fuller in his book, Incident Over Exeter, where a number of UFOs were sighted very close to power transmission lines. And in a couple of cases, UFOs were sighted so close that witnesses claimed that there was actual contact between a metallic device that was projected from the UFO and the power lines. very interesting sightings. Um, and then, of course, the sightings in Dexter, Michigan, where J. Allen Hynek, the Blue Book, uh, uh, the head of Blue Book and the main scientific consultant for Project Blue Book, the military's project to investigate UFOs, visited Dexter, Michigan, and uttered the now famous, or I would call infamous, description of what went on as being attributable to nothing but swamp gas, the swamp gas UFOs, which everyone in Michigan knows was a complete fabrication because those sightings were absolutely fantastic and clearly of non-human origin. So it was a very interesting year. It was an interesting wave of UFOs all over the U.S. at that time. That the sighting, my sighting, or our sighting that we observed in Connecticut was clearly a part of. I don't know how it was, that sighting was connected to all the other sightings, but certainly was part of that great UFO wave of 1965.
Chapter 3, Stairway to an Alternate Reality, talks about memories of you at the age of 2, having Greys as mentors. What actually happened at that time?
I have to tell you, this is probably the strangest ET or alien contact experience because to be honest with you, it wasn't something I experienced in real time. It was a sense memory, but had a lot of components to me that convinces me it was something I remembered that it really happened to me. I was just, oh gosh, I was 2.5, 3 years old. And my mother had just picked me up as we were walking up the stairs to our apartment because I was just so tired. We had to walk up so many stairs. But that act of having my mother pick me up, I I describe it as being a stimulus for a sense memory where I remembered a time in my life, I don't know when it was because I was so young at the time, 2 or 3 years old, but then I had had a relationship with grays, with beings that were 3.5 to 4 foot tall, looked identical to the same beings I had seen and a number of other times in my life. But what I recall about in this memory, what I recall in this memory, excuse me, was that I knew these beings. Almost had a personal, almost that and the memory involved, I don't know if I was walking or floating in the sky, being floated up to the UFO, but I was holding hands with the two grays, one on either side of me. But I somehow recall that I knew these beings. They had been my teachers, and at some point in my life, and at that time, I felt emotions that it was almost as if I felt a sense of longing that I had a relationship with these beings, but they were no longer part of my life. And in some way, I missed them because I viewed them as being my mentors, that I could learn, or I was being taught things and could learn things from these beings that no human beings could teach me. How a child of 2.5 to 3 years old could have these thoughts and sensations and feelings at this particular age, it is really remarkable for me to consider even today. That's why I describe it as the strangest quote unquote ET experience that I report in the book.
Do you recall how they actually appeared to you?
No, in this particular experience, all I remember is I knew these beings. I was holding hands with them. I'm not sure where we were going, but I just remembered them and I remembered the relationship, what their relationship was to me. Unfortunately, did not recall any of the details that would inform me why I felt I had that they were my mentors and I had this type of relationship with them and what they taught me. I just seemed to know this. Somehow I was made to know this. And that's all I can recall about that.
Could you describe in detail how the Greys looked like? Were they wearing anything?
No, you know, they were actually white in color. Now, but they had the same height, same disproportionately large hairless heads. very thin, very thin limbs, thin legs and arms. I couldn't see their features. In one particular case, I saw dozens of them, but from the side view because they were walking back and forth. I can only see them from the side. Many abductees have described the grays, even when they have this gray color, described that their skin was not really a biological skin, was more part of some type of spacesuit or quote unquote biomechanical suit. And other abductees have reported that they've seen the suit somewhere inside the UFO, and that the grays were again white in color, and then drew the conclusion that again they look gray when they put on this biomechanical suit. When they take it off, uh, hundreds of reports are that the color, the skin color of the what we call the grays is actually white, and this is what I saw. This is how the humanoid beings appeared to me. There was another instance where I saw one particular gray, and this, although I didn't, I would describe this being as being almost transparent or translucent. It's almost as if the being was morphing in and out of our dimension. But again, this was the one case where the color was more gray than white. But most of my experiences are with the beings that have a white skin color.
Mrs. Gray, when she saw my girlfriend, when she saw the cover of your book, the white grays, she'd get a lot of third eye visions, and she saw that.
This one, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
And she described them as dirty white-ish. So
Yes.
so that she saw those. Now in chapter 4, you do appear on a table, but do you remember the in between, like of the abduction? Because what happened? Do you remember how you were taken, or did you just wake
But
up on a table?
I, my experience that you're alluding to really um, really describes that classic pattern of alien abduction, where you remember the beginning, the end, but a lot of the middle part is missing. I just, like a lot of abductees, you remember being in your bedroom. I was 6 years old at the time. Maybe you just woken up, or in my case, I was just nodding off to sleep. And I saw strangest looking airplane I'd ever seen out of my window. This was again near dusk, and it must have been reflecting the waning sunlight, because that flash of light had attracted my attention. I looked out, I saw this craft that looked like it was made of some highly polished metallic material. But the fuselage of what I thought was an airplane looked more circular than tubular, which a number of abductees have described. I thought I saw wings, but again, it was silent. It was moving very, very not that high above the rooftops of the apartment buildings in our neighborhood, maybe 5 or 6 blocks away from where I was. And something very strange happened. I would have been usually very fascinated to watch this object until I couldn't see it anymore. I did something strange, and instead I turned my head away from the window, put my head back on the pillow, and fell asleep. Now I don't know how I got to where I was, but when I woke up, I was in a different place. It was no longer my bedroom. I knew I was on a table, a hard surface. I don't remember if it was cold, but it felt hard. And the thing I remember distinctly was the size. The table was much too long and much too wide to be necessary to accommodate the body of a 6-year-old child. I remember that. And I noticed some commotion in front of me. I don't know if I heard or I sensed it or I heard it, which caused me to sit up. And when I did, can I do this again? Show my book again. This is what I saw. So I really don't need to describe it. I just need to show it. Dozens of these humanoid beings. This view I had, this picture I had, was exactly the picture I saw of the aliens at the end of Steven Spielberg's Close Encounters of the Third Kind. You remember that scene when there were dozens of alien beings. And then when I did the research for this book, I found out Steven Spielberg had hired as actors to play the ETs at the end of the movie, all 6-year-old girls. So again, when I saw these beings, I thought, these are the strangest looking doctors I've ever seen. They look no taller than me. The average 6-year-old is 3.5 to 4 feet tall. They look my size. And they look no bigger than a 6-year-old. And again, just amazing to me that that's exactly what I saw when I watched Close Encounters of the Third Kind 16 years later after my experience. But, you know, I actually did have some type of what I describe as a communication. For some reason, I was wondering, are they all boys? Are they all girls? Are they both boys and girls? And I was instantly, as if someone was eavesdropping on my internal dialogue, I was made to understand, yes, both sexes are represented. How did I know that? Because again, they all look like clones of one another. I couldn't notice any secondary sexual characteristics. They all looked identical in height and weight and in every external anatomical characteristic you can think of. And yet, I seem to know there were both sexes represented. I think I'll finish describing that particular episode by saying that one thing I wanted to report was that I actually pointed at them and tried to talk to them verbally. I said to them, because I thought I was in a hospital of some kind, I said, hey, you're not my doctors. In other words, why did you bring me here? My parents didn't tell me I had to go into the hospital. For what purpose did you bring me here? And in doing so, I must have called attention to myself. And instantly I felt some type of a hand pressing on my chest. I felt it was a hand that was as large or larger than my abdomen and chest. So I get the sense it was a hand that was larger than a human hand. But I felt it gently pushed me back on the table until I was lying down again. And then I was completely rendered unconscious. And that's the last thing I remember.
Fascinating. Do you recall ever seeing medical instruments or furniture in the room?
Great question. No, I was so fascinated with what I saw at the 12 o'clock position. Imagine you're seeing dozens of beings you had never seen before that you don't know if they're human, are they non-human, and you're seeing half walking very briskly from right to left, the half walking in the other direction, and I didn't look to the right, I didn't look to the left, and very very soon after that, I'm actually brought under some type of control, whether psychological control or physical control. I did not have the chance to notice any instruments, anything specific that was part of the interior of the room that would lead me to believe I was in a spacecraft or a UFO. The only sense I had was that the walls were completely uniform. They had no objects that were coming out of the wall, like a light fixture or instrument of some type, and they're all of the same color. I should say that the whole room I was in was bathed by this, I won't say bright light, but a white light, the source of which I really couldn't identify. I didn't know where this light was coming from, but it was again, outside that room were the ETs were, and inside the room I was in was bathed in this, what I describe as a soft white light. That's all I saw.
Now, when you were being brought back, let's say, did you ever wake up with your pajamas like inside out, upside down?
No, no. That's a very commonly reported experience. I mean, a colleague of mine in this field has had the same type of experience. He describes having an abduction experience. Before the experience, he had cut his left thumb and put a band-aid around it. When he woke up, the band-aid was on his right thumb. Now, I remember, one of the experiencers, one of the most famous experiencers that reported what you just described was Betty Hill, I think, who had recalled when when her, she had some type of rip in her dress. I think her dress might have been put on a little bit um, uh, differently than she had put it on after she returned home after she was abducted with her husband Barney Hill. But a number of other abductees have reported what you just described, that they had either a shirt put on backwards or a pajama top or bottom put on backwards. I don't think I can recall anything like that happened to me. I had one instance where my abduction occurred after I left my bedroom. It was the middle of the night. I walked outside, I crossed the street, went to a neighbor's property, and had some type of an encounter. And when I walked back, I can remember being in my pajamas. I didn't put on any shoes or slippers, and the bottoms of my feet were wet because at that time of the early morning there was dew on the grass. But other than that, that's the only physical effect that I can associate with being abducted that I was able to recall.
Uh, After an abduction or an experience, did you ever go see your mom or your dad?
The only time I tried to make some type of communication was one instance where I woke up and instantly I was completely alert and terrified. I sat at the edge of the bed and I knew something had happened to me, something had been done to me that was very frightening, but I couldn't recall what it was. And I went to my parents' bedroom. They both woke up when they saw me, and I tried to tell him, and I believe I was trying to tell him that I'd had another abduction experience. Not couldn't I remember what happened to me. I knew something had happened. I knew it terrified me. I knew it was wrong. It shouldn't have been done to me. Not only couldn't I remember what it was, but my vocal cords were paralyzed. I couldn't utter a sound. I tried, and I tried to call my mother's name. I couldn't say a word. And at that point, my father thought I was having some type of a nightmare, but I was completely awake. Brought me back to bed. Now, I didn't know at this young age what any of these experiences meant. So I never discussed it with my parents. I almost as if I tried to explain them on my own. I had some ear infections before the abduction I had at 6 years old, when I remember being on the table. And in the winter before that, that was in the summer when I had that abduction. I had ear infections in the winter before. They returned in the fall or early winter after the abduction experience, but they were not as severe. And the way I had tried to explain this experience is I was convinced that the abduction was part of my therapy for my ear infection. And I actually been in a hospital that these beings were some type of doctors that uh, were helping me treat these ear infections at that time. Now I know, of course, that there's a completely different, significance to these experiences. but I never discussed these ideas that I had about what had happened to me. Never discussed what had happened to me with anyone in my family, um, for reasons I really can't explain. Almost as if I was told or persuaded or warned against telling anybody about what had happened to me. It gets to that common theme of deception that many investigators and contactees or abductees associate with, particularly with the abductions involving the Greys.
Same for me. Same for me.
Yeah,
Uh,
they
uh,
want us to keep it all secret.
yeah. Chapter 6, you talk about procedures regarding scarring inside a nasal cavity from an unknown procedure.
Wow, you know, again, this was the experience more than anything that really convinced me that this phenomenon is real and it happened to me because I read in the abduction literature. I think it was a book by Bud Hopkins about a family where the 6-year-old had the same exact experience I had. There were abductions in multiple generations of this family, and the mother of this child claimed to be an abductee. She also claimed that her children described the Greys being in their bedrooms at night, and they had unexplained nosebleeds, as I had. Very common feature, especially of abductees that have nasal implants. Um, and not only that, a emergency room physician and a ear, nose, and throat doctor who examined this child, this abductee that was written about by Bud Hopkins, found a scar, I think either in the nasopharynx, in the part of the throat behind the nasal cavity, or in the nasal cavity. Both doctors found the scar in this abductee, the 6-year-old abductee, and I was the same age when my ear, nose, and throat doctor found the same type of scar. Uh, at the time, I was having a tonsillectomy. And again, this abductee, I think it was this child was in Indiana, was also in the hospital for the same type of procedure, and the doctor found the same type of physical evidence of what I believe was a nasal implantation by one or more of the Greys. So here, in two different instances, and there are many more accounts that where these particular features of the phenomenon are also replicated, reproduced. But you have um, the experience of being abducted, the unexplained nasal, um, uh, the nosebleeds, excuse me, and then the finding of a scar that would indicate there was some type of medical procedure performed involving the nasal cavity, suggesting to me that involved the nasal implants.
Um, have you ever had like MRIs or stud detectors scans?
I've thought about it, but I've never had a medical condition that would indicate that I should have a CT scan or an MRI, um, which means I cannot rule out that I don't still have an implant. I don't know if I do. I do remember being warned that at the age of 6, not to blow my nose too hard, or not, that if I sneeze too hard, the implant could come out. So, and also I had the vague sense when I had this recollection, again at the age of 6 years old, that that had happened. I don't know what I had done with it, whether I hurriedly flushed it down the toilet or what, but I had this recollection, that was the vaguest recollection that I had of having a nasal implant, um, or I would say the vaguest component of this memory, um, that I think I'd lost one. But if that happened, I don't know if I was reimplanted and whether or not I still have the implant. But no, I have not had any, brain imaging to answer the question of whether I have a foreign object inside my brain that would provide evidence that I might have been implanted.
In chapter 7, you talk about the medical consequences of having implants.
Yes, I mean, it's just amazing that um, when you look at the avenue of approach, surgical approach, the neurosurgeons used to remove pituitary tumors. It's interesting that it involves putting a probe through one of the sinuses called the sphenoid sinus, and basically, this would be the route that probably an alien surgeon would use if there was an implant that was to be introduced into the nasal cavity or actually into the brain. And it's known from the medical literature that when you do this procedure involving any type of intervention that goes through this particular sinus cavity, there's a great probability that that can cause an infection that can spread to the meninges of the brain. And in some cases, it can be fatal. You can have a fatal meningitis that results from the introduction of bacteria into a sinus cavity from this type of medical procedure. And I have to say that my grandfather in the 30s had no medical procedure. He had no dental procedure or other type of medical procedure, but did have this strange sinus infection that spread to the meninges of his brain. He developed the meningitis, and he died from this at the age of 42. And it's interesting that, his physical symptoms and the course of his disease that led to his death would be caused by a medical intervention involving the sinus, the nasal cavity, and one of the sinuses, the sphenoid sinus, because it's the perfect route of transmission of bacteria to the meninges of the brain from the sphenoid sinus. And I speculate that, since many investigators have reported that if you're abducted, it's much more likely one of your parents was abducted, or your children will be abducted. So I speculate that, like other families, that my family, was also an example of this multi-generational interest that the ETs who abduct human beings have. If they abduct one generation, for some reason they're interested in particular bloodlines because of their genetic background. So that's why they're abducting more than one generation in a family. And my conclusion is that there's a lot of evidence that my grandfather was, like myself, an abductee, and unfortunately had very adverse consequence of an implantation procedure on the part of the Greys that went very badly.
Did you have the chance to look at the compositional structure of implants and how what they look under a microscope and how they're coated with your own human tissue to stop rejection?
Well, a lot of that work was done by Dr. Roger Lear, the podiatric surgeon in America, who worked with a lot of other material scientists, and he did have a lot of interesting findings that came out of that research, where he found that there was not only human tissue surrounding the implants after he surgically removed the implants, but in one case the implant was coated with nerve tissue, which is very strange. That usually doesn't happen. There's often some type of reaction between an implant placed in the body and normal tissue, but it would be very strange for the implant to attract and then integrate with or form some type of connection with nerve tissue. So that's an interesting phenomenon, an interesting finding that Dr. Roger Lear had obtained. Um, other investigators have also found, this host reaction to the implant involving some type of growth of human tissue around the implant, but also um, the physical analysis of the implants has, in a number of cases, has revealed some interesting findings. The radioisotope ratios are very different from what you would expect based on the composition of the material, whether it's silver or gold or aluminum. That was an unexpected finding. Also, in some cases, the implants looked like they were manufactured. There's very thin, micron thick layers of, of, of material that are layered one on top of another that indicate that the implants were manufactured, that they didn't occur naturally. One very interesting case, because I've not been able to find very many, if any, studies that show some type of a functionality, like integrated circuit or anything that would indicate that the implant is some type of machine. But in one case, a material scientist, after examining one of these implants that was retrieved from an abductee, found what looks like a radio transmitter on the implant. And I think there was some type of microwave transmission they were able to record from the implant. How that would get there on an object that came from a meteor or a naturally occurring object, I don't know. So again, that type of implant came from either a human source, a human laboratory, or an alien laboratory. I think there's no other explanation. But in my case, I have not had the chance to retrieve my implant, hold it in my hand, and subject it to any type of scientific analysis. I wish I had had that chance.
During all of your experiences, are you aware if any bodily fluids were taken from you, genetic material?
You know, I have to compare what happened to me with what happened to a number of abductees, and the parallels are quite striking. I did have one instance where I was in the middle of sleep. I was woken up, and I had the idea, the very compelling idea, that I was supposed to have some type of an encounter that would be very fascinating. I think I was 11 or 12, 13 maybe at the time. And I got out of bed. I knew I had to leave my bedroom, leave my house in the middle of the night very quickly, and or else I was going to miss having this opportunity to encounter something non-human. I had no idea at the time what this was going to entail. So I walked maybe 100 yards outside after leaving our house, became at one point paralyzed, and I couldn't see anything. I couldn't hear anything. In other words, I had this alteration in my state of consciousness, and I did feel some type of a sensation indicating I had some type of device placed on my groin area. Barney Hill also reported this in much more detail, that he had the same experience when he was abducted along with his wife, uh, um, Betty, in 1961. And, this leads me to believe that, like many, many male abductees and female abductees, that one of the purposes of the abduction was for the collection of genetic material. So I have to say that, and I should report that another experiencer had also described being woken up out of a sound sleep, walking out of his house in the middle of the night in his pajamas like I had, and then having an encounter with grays that were in the backyard of his property, being taken to a landed UFO and having genetic material removed during that particular encounter. So this is something that's commonly reported, and I feel also happened to me as well.
Other than the Greys, have you ever seen other types of beings?
No, no, and then the sense I had is, and when I was on the table, which I believe was, on board a UFO at the age of 6 years old, that there might have been another type of being, but as we now know, there are people report seeing the 3.5 to 4 foot tall grays, and then either mantis looking ETs or taller grays that seem to have some type of a supervisory role, that seems to have um, exert some type of influence or control over the shorter grays. And I'm speculating because all I felt was a hand on my chest when I was on the table that pushed me back down after I'd seen, the dozens of grays in front of me, and that hand was the hand of a being that was considerably taller than the the short humanoids that I had seen in front of me at the 20 feet from the foot of the table I was on. But I didn't see anything else that would lead me to believe that either this was of a similar species to that of the Greys or a different species. All of my other encounters were with the same creatures, the same humanoids, the same height, the same external anatomical appearance. In one case, I saw the being uh, um, at the same in the same region of a table lamp I had near my bed. And after the experience, I remember the being's head was no taller than the top of the table lamp. Well, I measured the table lamp, and I recall it being 3.5 to 4 feet tall. So, which would confirm that again, this being was the same being that I'd seen at a number of times, um, earlier during my life.
In chapter 8, Stalked in the Suburbs, you talk about you describe other abduction experiences you had as a teen. What happened?
Yes, well, I talked about one of them where I was woken up in the middle of the night and I had to walk out to a neighbor's property to have this strange encounter. And I also talked about um, you know being woken up in the middle, or just waking up terrified, and then telling my parents something had happened to me, but I was unable to speak. Um, another time, another time, I had, and I had this a number of times. This classic sleep paralysis experience, where along with the sleep paralysis, people report seeing um, strange figures in the room. In many cases, they see what looks like the classic gray alien. This happened to me. Um, I woke up, I couldn't move, and that was the most, frankly, that was the most terrifying part of the experience, that I was completely unable to move. But because my head, while I was sleeping on my right side, my head was moved slightly to the right. I could see, even though I couldn't move my head at all, I could see a being that was standing, gosh, not more than a foot or two from me. And this was what I described to you, maybe 10 or 15 minutes ago. The being that looked, although he was transparent, to the point where I could see the table lamp behind him. I call him him. I don't know if it was a male or female, but the color was more grayish. Um, for some reason, I remember the build being a little bit more stocky. I think it was more stocky. In other words, the chest was a little bit wider than what I could discern, from looking at the beings that are pictured on my book Dominion Lost that I showed a little while ago. But but the scariest part of what I observed about the being was. I couldn't see its hands. And then I realized that the reason why I couldn't see its hands is because he either was holding my head or the hands were behind my head as if he was doing some type of procedure or operation, whether he was about to perform an implantation or remove an implant. I don't know, because very quickly, I'm guessing after the ET noticed I could see him. Slowly, the being began to disappear. And I tried to scream, but I couldn't. I tried as much as I could to yell, but I couldn't. And at some point after the gray was gone, I could wake up. Um, but that, I would have to say, of all the encounters I had with the grays, this was probably the most frightening, because the being was so close. I was completely unable to move, and I knew he was doing something to me, but I didn't know what he was doing.
Because of your coming out, have you ever had backlash from the military or the government?
No, no, um, a number of my colleagues that have had the same experiences I've had. Either they're authors that have published their story, or podcasters, or people that have contacted me that are now, after having these experiences, have become investigators. They've tried to, more than just publishing a book, they've tried to speak out to the degree that they've contacted, political leaders, members of Congress, and that has resulted in some blowback, where they felt that they were being followed. They did have people come into their hotel room while they weren't there, and move their luggage around as if they were either looking for something or trying to intimidate them. I was surprised that I had nothing in terms of people, nothing involving people from the military, people from the government, other strange people, try to contact me. And even after my book became a bestseller, and I went on a number of contests, large number of podcasts, I really, as an open book, telling everything that had happened to me. I haven't had this experience, fortunately. I don't know why the experience that some experiencers say things that are threatening to, the government or military, and others are kind of left alone. But fortunately, I've been left alone.
Lucky. Did you ever have the chance to see shadow beings or live out paranormal type of experiences?
No, I haven't seen the shadow beings. I know those encounters can be particularly frightening. Um, I would have to say all of my experiences in the paranormal kind of are focused on these encounters with ETs or aliens, uh, that we that we are commonly known as the Greys. I can't really point to anything paranormal that has happened to me. Um, I would have to say I'm in the minority, because from what I understand, a majority of abductees claim that they do have paranormal experiences that they don't associate with the abduction phenomenon, with a much greater frequency than they had before they began having their abduction experiences. I don't know why this is the case. I don't know whether or not um, that abductees are unique. They have some unique ability to maybe view beings that may be interdimensionals, and that having these experiences over and over kind of maybe causes this particular ability to become more developed, so that now they're able to not only to interact with these interdimensional beings, but also it opens them up to interact with other aspects of the paranormal, that may involve other non-human beings, other species, or perhaps other energies or entities that kind of represent something that represent a separate phenomenon from the phenomenon of alien abduction.
Now, your book can be purchased on Amazon. Am I correct?
Yes. You really focused a lot on my unabridged version, which has a lot of scientific analysis of, as I say, how I think the implants work, the materials they're made of, what their function is, why the aliens are using them, and also it describes in theory how I think the propulsion system of the alien UFOs work, and a lot of other scientific analysis. But the book I showed you is available, or early is available on Amazon, is the unabridged version. This book basically describes my abduction experiences without all the science heavy portions in the unabridged version. Now, both books are on Amazon. They're both by the same title. If people are interested in exploring some of the scientific questions I deal with after reading about my experiences, they might be interested in my longer book, which again is a slightly different color. It shows a child being beamed up into a hovering UFO. But both books are on Amazon, and both have the same title: Dominion Lost, the Scientists' Own Alien Abduction Encounters.
Okay, well, I'll add the links in the description box for those that do want to purchase the books. To finish off the interview, do you have perhaps a closing statement or another story that you might want to get out?
I wrote the book because I want to, as a mainstream scientist, I want to encourage as many scientists, who might be inclined to become more interested, perhaps even investigate this phenomenon, to be drawn into the fold. Because for so long, this has been something that even I was afraid to even talk about, let alone investigate. And secondly, I'm really hoping that it will encourage scientists that are experiencers to come forward, tell their stories, whether it's on a podcast or whether it involves, publishing their own particular account. I think it would, in doing so, if scientists would come forward and admit that they're, as Dr. Gary Nolan has done, they're also experiencers, it will legitimize the scientific investigation of this phenomenon. And I think this is something to be hoped for, because the only way we're going to learn about it and find out what this phenomenon is all about and whether or not it represents any threat to human beings is to pay attention to it, recognize that it's real, and begin to investigate it in a very serious way. At least that's my greatest hope, and and a main reason why I wrote the book.
Well, Bruce, thank you so much for coming on. It's been fun, and I appreciate all the knowledge that you were able to share with us today. It's been fun.
Thanks for giving me the opportunity to tell my story to your audience. I appreciate it.
And to those watching, hope you enjoyed today's interview. I'm your host, Mr. Great. More interviews coming up, and I will see you guys next time. So take care, everyone. Hello, everyone. This is Mr. Great, and thanks for watching today's episode. If you are an abductee, contactee, or experiencer, and you believe that your story could help others, please feel free to contact me through my YouTube channel email. When it comes to experiencers, the ET phenomena, and the future, remember, truth will out.